Continuing our coverage of the DOJ court filing that outlines the efforts by the Justice Department to get classified documents back from Mar-a-Lago, right up until they made the decision to send in the FBI with a search warrant. Now, as we outlined in the opening segment, the document details how the DOJ gave the former president plenty of opportunities to deliver classified documents. But that still does not mean that the former president will necessarily be indicted. I realize we live in a world, particularly on cable news, where you have to pick a side. It's either no big deal and the FBI is being totally unfair, or this is the definitive moment that shows us that Donald Trump definitely, absolutely will be indicted. But here we try to offer up sober, straightforward analysis and opinion. It follows the facts and evidence, not cheerleading for one side or the other. So let's start with the politicized left-wing media, which was quick to presume that the cuffs are coming.
Just on the available public information we have, how could you not indict the former president on this?
I don't understand a world in which now Merrick Garland could not, in the end, indict Trump. And I think that's where we're headed, and then the Trump people know it. Donald Trump knows it. It's the thing that's causing the panic.
This evidence just shows he's guilty as sin. He did this.
Look, this is really bad for Donald Trump. But the question remains whether the primary goal of the FBI was to get the documents back into a secure location or to build a case against him. As I've said before, it's very unclear that there will be an indictment. I still think it's around a 40% chance. I'm just using that as an example to show you where my head's at. Now, in the right-wing media, despite all the damning details, to many it's still a witch hunt, and Trump is the victim. Maybe the silliest defense came from South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem on Fox and Friends this morning.
I guess the question to all of you is what was in those documents and folders? Do you know?
No,
Top
we
secrets.
don't.
And we deserve
We
to
don't
know
know what they say.
And I don't know if the DOJ and FBI can be trusted to tell us what was in there. That's the thing. You can see folders, you can see big words on the. Do we know that is really what President Trump brought to his home? Do we know that he put them there? Do we know what's inside?
Right. It's all planted evidence. That's, of course, part of what the investigation is for, too. But we do now know the lengths someone in the Trump camp, or Trump himself, went to subvert the effort to get these government documents back. The only defense of Trump right now, morally, is apparently going on the offense by sowing distrust of the nation's legal and law enforcement officials. But kudos to Fox and Friends' Steve Doocy, who's a longtime Republican and one-time Trump favorite, who said this of the filing.
Keep in mind, according to the filing, the agents found 3 classified documents in Donald Trump's desks. What were they doing in the desks? And when you look at these particular things right here, at least 5 yellow folders marked top secret and another secret SCI, that stands for sensitive compartmentalized information. These are the biggest secrets in the world.
Steve's asking the right questions, but that didn't play well with Fox's fiercest Trump defender, Dan Bongino, who went after Doocy for even suggesting Trump may have done anything wrong.
Why would you trust the FBI when it comes to Trump? Can you give me a reason?
None.
Anyone? Where have they shown? Okay, thank you.
Zero.
Where have they shown any documented history of unbiased, nonpartisan, law enforcement type activity? The answer is in no Trump case ever. So your default defense of the FBI is outrageous.
It's not a defense of the FBI to simply say that the evidence against Trump is troubling and damning. And not to go down a rabbit hole here, but both the Inspector General of the FBI and the United States Senate, led by Republicans at the time, investigated the opening of the Russia investigation, found mistakes, but no evidence that it was based on bias or partisanship. Law enforcement make mistakes, but I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. Joining me again are Tom Dupree and Alex Little. All right, so Tom, we didn't touch on this before, and I mentioned sort of the best defense. What is, do you think, based on what we know today, not the sort of silly, oh, they planted evidence defense, what is, do you think, Trump's best defense potentially at this point?
Dan, from my perspective, they really have to somehow get to his intent. In other words, to show that even if he committed the physical acts that could give rise to criminal liability, namely withholding documents that he should properly have turned over to the federal government, he could argue perhaps that he simply lacked a criminal intent for whatever reason. Either he had a plausible good faith basis for believing that they weren't government documents, or he wasn't obligated to return them, or something along those lines. That's my sense of where they would need to go with this.
Yeah, and Alex Little, I think that the most likely sort of quote unquote defense would be that he didn't know himself, right? That he didn't know exactly which documents he had. He wasn't paying attention to which ones were at what level of classification, and his lawyers assured him that he was turning over everything that he had to turn over.
I think he even has to go a little bit farther. I think he has to have some sort of reason to have kept them around. You know, if these documents have some significance to him personally, if they deal with missions that he may have initiated or special, moments in his presidency that he kept around for sort of personal reasons, and he was assured that he could do that, I think that's going to be the best sort of defense, because the defense has to be plausible and reasonable. And with this president, that's a, plausible explanation.
And one of the arguments we've heard, Alex, is that he was writing a memoir, right? And that he wanted them around to write a memoir, right?
And that would absolutely fit. And that's going to come down to what's actually in these documents. If we're talking about weapons systems, if we're talking about really sensitive human intelligence, about who that might reveal a particular, human spy on the ground, it's going to be very difficult to come up with really any defense that's reasonable.
Yeah, and I think to present a defense, there's going to have to be some appreciation that it was wrong, right? I mean, Tom...
Absolutely. Just you have to mea culpa, and that's really hard for the former president.
Right.
But when I'm advising clients, you got to say, listen, yeah, we screwed up. That was a mistake.
Right. It can't just be, well, I declassified everything that was removed, because even if he technically declassified it, as a practical matter, this is still documents, information that no one else apparently knew had been declassified, or at least not people in the current administration. And as a result, the FBI, according to the document, had to literally ensure that people had the right level of classification to even examine the documents, because they were apparently so sensitive. So, as I think about, quote unquote, a defense here, there does have to be some recognition, it seems. They shouldn't have been there, right? Yes, okay. I shouldn't have had him at my house. I get it now. But I don't see the former president ever saying that, Tom.
He's not going to say he's sorry. And look, I think a declassification defense faces two hurdles. Number one is he's going to have to show he actually declassified these documents. There's a procedure and a protocol. I'm skeptical that they were followed in this case. Second problem is that the crimes DOJ is investigating don't turn on whether the documents at issue were classified.
Right.
They could affect a charging decision. They could affect penalties.
Right.
But, if you have federal documents in your possession, you don't turn them back, that can be a violation.
Right. But let's agree that they better not prosecute just on sort of, oh, well, that he had documents he shouldn't have had. They're not going to prosecute based on that.
They have to have more than a foot fault here, right? And if you're going to indict a former president, it can't be for a foot fault.
Right. Tom Dupree and Alex Little, thank you both so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.